Alright, is everything ready to go here? Let's see. That's turned off. That's turned off. Is this turned off? Yes, it is. Alright, that's turned on. The stream appears to be live. Let's go ahead and get going. Hello! Shadowcat back! And today, we're getting back into the whole culture, news, stuff like that. Last week's lecture was fun, talking about tabletop gaming, because I do so much love tabletop gaming. However, we can't do that forever. Actually, I could do that forever. This is my channel. I can do whatever I want with it. I'm not going to, though, because there are some other things that we got to talk about. And today, I had a bit of a revelation earlier in the week, and because of that, I wanted to sit down and really have a conversation about this. Because I want to talk about heroes and role models and things like that in culture. Because we've seen a trend over the last decade or so. And that trend has been to take all of our old heroes and destroy them. As Disney so eloquently put it, you must let go of the past. Kill it if you have to. And they have done an excellent job of killing the past. And a lot of people, myself included with this list, had to ask the question of why. Why are they doing this? Why would they do this? I mean, what's the point of it? What's the goal of it? What do they gain from this? Why do it in the first place? And after, literally years of going through this and, kind of just idly rolling it around, I think I might have finally come up with a solution to it. And it's not a solution, or it's not as simple as just, well, they don't like the heroes. It's true, but there's more to it than that. And so that's what we're going to discuss today. Before we get into that, check the chat. I see that JP is in here first thing this morning, mumbling about cookies. However, that has been solved. So, hello, JP. Do not ask me about the cookies. I didn't bring any. I didn't say I was bringing any. Okay, you cannot put this on me. Blizz is also in the chat, and Blizz did bring cookies, so that's good. Hello, Blizz. Good to see you. Thank you for taking care of that whole cookie situation for me. That's one less thing that I have to worry about, and I can always use less things to worry about. Okay, so let's get into this, because that's all I've got in the chat so far. Today we're talking about heroes, and this was a bit of a hard subject for me starting out. And it's a subject that's been hard for me going way back in my life. And we're going to go back almost 30 years now, okay? Way back to when I was in school. And I mean like elementary school, because when you're in elementary school, at least here in the US, I don't know about in other parts of the world, but one of the things that they will impress upon you in school is role models. They tell you to be a role model, they want you to act like a role model, and they ask you who your role models are. And I remember that when I was in school, I was asked this question like every single year, sometimes several times a year. And it's like, who are your role models? And other people would say things like, they would throw out different answers, different people. I never had an answer. And the reason that I never had an answer is because I always thought that when they asked the role model, they would say, who do you want to be like? And my answer, of course, was, I don't want to be like anyone. I just want to be me. Why are you asking me who I want to be like? And so, throughout my entire school career, and even through most of my adulthood, I really never had an answer for that. And to be honest, I still don't. There are people, of course, that I admire. There are traits in people that I admire. But there's no person that I really want to be like. Why would I want to? Why would I want to try and step into somebody else's life? And it's kind of the way that I saw it. And so I always kind of blew the question off and never gave it any more thought, especially, after being asked the question a few times and never having an answer, I just gave up on the question. And so that's it. The same thing goes for heroes. People would ask me, it's like, who is your hero? And I never had an answer for that either. I mean, who would be my hero? I don't know. My hero is presumably someone great. I don't know. Now, when they asked about heroes and who we liked, I can think about what powers that we liked. For example, if we're talking, say, Marvel heroes. Who do I like in the Marvel pantheon? I like Iron Man, mostly just because I like robots and stuff like that. So, Iron Man is great. And, you know, all the same people who fall into that same line, so War Machine and all of them. If we're going DC, there's a couple of Iron Man-like people, but when it came to DC, my favorite was always the Green Lantern. I mean, if I had to pick any superpower out there, I would take a lantern ring. A lantern ring would be awesome. Now, granted, there's several different kinds of lantern rings. I don't think that I would ever be a Green Lantern. I think I'd be more of a Yellow Lantern, honestly. But still, a lantern ring every day of the week. I'd love one. But does that mean that I want to be like the Green Lantern? Any of the Green Lanterns? No, not really. I don't want to be them. I like a ring, but I don't want to be them. I don't want to take their place. I don't want to do necessarily what they're doing. So when people ask me, it's like, what hero do you want to be like? I have no idea. I don't want to be like any of them. And I struggled with this for a long time. And it just came to me a few weeks ago. I was just kind of mulling it over in my head. And it was one of those moments of clarity where it just kind of clicked for me. And I got it. I understand now why we were always asked that question and why you were supposed to figure out who is your role model supposed to be like? Or who is your hero supposed to be like? I mean, who did you want to end up being like? And I got it. I finally understand the question now. It's 30 years after, took me a while to get there, but I got it. So let's get into this discussion proper. And we're going to start, of course, with a couple of definitions. That way we know exactly what we're talking about. So let me just bring up my browser. There we go. Like I said, let's start with some definitions, okay? First off, a role model. So a role model's definition is very similar. A person looked to by others as an example or to be imitated. Okay? And that word right there, imitated. It's not that you want to be that person. It's not like you want to live that person's life. You don't want to marry the same kind of person, live in the same kind of house, drive the same kind of car. I mean, some people do that, but those people are weird. No, it's just someone that you want to kind of imitate. Just a little bit. Not all of it. You don't want to mimic them. Just you want to be a reasonable facsimile. So that's a role model. What about a hero? How do we define hero? Well, according to the dictionary, according to Oxford, a hero is a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. Which, that does describe most of the heroes that we have. If you think about the Justice League, you've got Superman, you've got Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, The Flash, the Martian Manhunter, all those guys. I don't really remember the rest of them. But you have all of them, and all of them are admirable in some kind of way. Not all of them are admirable in the same kind of way, but some of them do have similar qualities. For example, courage. It's listed right there. You cannot accuse anybody in the Justice League of not having courage. And courage sometimes does mean different things to different members in the Justice League. I mean, courage for Superman is just getting in there and doing things. Courage for Batman is you could die. Like, at literally any time. Because Batman doesn't have superpowers. Except for the fact that he's actually still alive. Batman has the most plot armor out of anybody. That's what he spends all of his money on. Plot armor. But the point is, heroes are people who you want to imitate as well. They're admired, they're idealized. You say, these are things that are good, and if I want to be a good person, then these are the things that I should probably be doing. And this is not new information for me. It's not new information for you. These are all things that we already know. Even if we didn't know the exact definition word for word, we all knew what a hero was. We all know what a role model is. There was something else, though, that came about while I was in school, and this is, partially due to my age and partially just due to the time that I grew up. And it was a big phenomenon in school. Now, being that I am not a religious person, I am and always have been very much an atheist, I ignored this for the longest time. I thought it was kind of annoying, but at the same time, I wasn't bothered by it because I was not one of these people. But maybe you remember it. Or maybe you're not old enough to remember it. WWJD. Does anybody remember this? WWJD. In other words, what would Jesus do? You saw this everywhere. You had it on everything. There were wristbands, there were hats, there were shirts, there were pogs that had WWJD on it. Do you remember pogs? If you're under 30 years old, you do not remember pogs, because they were gone by then. However, you had pogs with WWJD on it. It was everywhere. And the idea was simple. It was just a constant, passive reminder that whatever you do in life, in your daily life, just ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Whenever you're presented with a dilemma, whenever you're presented with a conflict, just a very simple reminder, just if you happen to look down and see the wristband, or you know the wristband is there, what would Jesus do? Again, I thought it was rather silly. I mean, after all, if you're a Christian, do you really need to have a wristband on to remind you about Jesus? No, you're a Christian. This is silly. Why are we doing this? And so I ignored it, and I let the entire thing go by the wayside. Did not care, didn't think about it again at all until a couple of weeks ago. And it was just one of those floating memories that just kind of came back at just the right time, okay? This is like two planes colliding in the air. Don't know where they came from, don't know who was asleep at the wheel, but these two planes came together and just bam! Huge explosion. Alright? And it was an explosion of consciousness. It was a revelation. No, not that revelation. Not the chapter revelations, just an actual revelation. And it occurred to me. The idea of having a role model, the idea of having a hero, is no different than wearing one of these wristbands. The idea that you carry a wristband around to say, what would Jesus do in my situation, and that's what I should probably do, is no different than a child who would idolize, say, Superman, and say, if Superman were here, what would Superman do? Of course, the answer with Superman is usually punch something, and if you're dealing with bullies, that's probably a good idea too. Regardless, though, the point was to give yourself a reminder to think about what somebody better than you would do, so that you can be better in turn. This is why they would ask you constantly, who is your role model? Because if your role model was somebody like, say, Albert Einstein, does that mean that it's your goal in life to be Jewish? Probably not. I mean, unless you already are Jewish, in which case, good job. Is it your goal to live in Germany or escape Germany? Also, probably not. However, what were the things that Einstein embodied? He embodied intelligence. He embodied ambition. I mean, this was one of the greatest geniuses in human history, and he worked as a clerk in a patent office. By the way, if you don't realize what that is, that is essentially the mailroom for government work. Alright, so like every time you hear a story about somebody going into the corporate world and it's like, oh wait, you work for this corporation? What do you do there? It's like, mailroom. It is the bottom level. And Albert Einstein, one of the greatest thinkers that we ever had, worked at the bottom level. However, he did so because he needed to work. He was a hard worker and he needed to pay the bills. So he took the job he could and he did it to the best of his abilities. And it was while he was doing that that he learned all the things that he needed to not just develop his different theories on physics, but to also get them written down and patented himself. Or whatever it is that you actually do with theoretical physics. I'm not sure. The point being that these were things that he did. He was a hard researcher. He was introspective. He was abstractive. He was all of these different things at once. He was no stranger to taking his own theories, turning them upside down, and tearing apart his own work just to make sure that it was right. Which is how we went from having general relativity to special relativity, because Einstein said that, you know what? General relativity does work to a point. However, then there are things that even my own theories fail to explain, and so he developed his own separate theory of special relativity. I mean, do you realize what kind of ego that takes? To say, this is my life's work, and I might have gotten it wrong. Hold on, I'm going to redo my life's work. I've spoken before on this channel about the crisis that we are in when it comes to science, because the idea of trusting the science has gone way out the window at this point. And I went to, at length, discuss that this all started, at least as far as I can tell, this more or less all started back in the 2000s with Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. That is not necessarily where it started, because the tobacco industry had been paying off scientists for a long time, but when the tobacco industry got involved with science, nobody gave it any serious thought. If we had information, okay? We had data. We had evidence for years that smoking was bad for you, okay? Whether that was, you saw the study where they showed that long-term smoking could cause things like lung cancer, or more likely, you knew somebody in your family who was a long-term smoker, and they would tell you, yeah, my life is awful. Don't start smoking. I know I heard that a lot. Everybody around me smoked. Everybody around me also told me, do not start. It's not worth it. So when a company like Marlboro comes out and says, no, it's good for you, everybody looked at you, or looked at them and said, yeah, we don't believe you. But with An Inconvenient Truth, people said, oh wow. I mean, we've been pushing this idea that like the rainforests are dying out, that the oceans are becoming acidic, and we're losing 10,000 species a day. Yeah, that wasn't true. However, nobody really had any kind of information to say otherwise. After all, if you're in the US, all the rainforests are that way. A long way. I mean, they're all the way in South America, and some in Central America, but either way, there's no way that you can see that. So you had to rely on what they told you. They said that the ice caps were melting and they were going to be gone. And they even showed pictures of it. They showed pictures of a polar bear on this little piece of ice, and satellite photos of the North Pole where there's like no ice there, except for like the very tip. Okay, well, I mean, that was true, but what they neglected to say is that those pictures were taken in the summer when the North Pole is literally facing the sun 24 hours a day? Of course there's no ice. This is what happens in the summer. And then, come the winter, when it's facing away from the sun 24 hours a day, the ice comes back. But people didn't know. People saw, people believed. And thus, when it came out that a lot of what was in An Inconvenient Truth was absolutely either fabricated or it had the truth stretched so far and so thin that it was transparent, people stopped believing scientists in general. And that has only gotten worse over time, because many scientists go to work and they will put their life's effort into working on a particular theorem. And especially if you work in one of these fields like environmentalism, if you started working in environmental science because of something like An Inconvenient Truth, you thought you were going to try and save the world, and so you went to school learning about environmental science, you went to college, you did all these things, and now you're, maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from college, and you're working for like minimum wage at some meteorology place. If someone presented you with the evidence that you were wrong and that everything you believed was wrong, you only have two options there. Either accept that you were wrong and that to a certain percentage you have wasted a significant amount of your life, or alternately, you can declare that the evidence in front of you is wrong, that you are right, and that you haven't wasted anything. It's everybody else that's wrong. Well, as we've seen nowadays, that is the way that most science tends to go. You are right, the rest of the world is wrong. Einstein didn't do that. Einstein said that my theorem has a problem. I'm going to undo everything, redo it, and I'm going to figure out exactly how do I make it work. That is admirable. So when we're talking about heroes, whether that be Albert Einstein, whether that be, say, George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, even if it's, Carl Sagan, all of these people embody certain traits that we would like to see in ourselves. Which is why, very similar to the WWJD, you can take your heroes and ask what would they do in the same instance. Of course, this does require that you know your heroes, or at least know what they stand for, but let's just assume that you know that. Now, I have this conversation because when we talk about a lot of these people, including Jesus, there has been a concerted effort to push back against them. We've seen this in all of our TV shows, and I am going to get into them a lot more later. But we've seen a lot of our heroes that we grew up with in TV and movies and things like that. And those heroes have been destroyed. There has been an effort made to paint them in the worst light, to show them backtracking on their own principles, to turn them into hypocrites, to turn them into monsters and villains. And this has happened with pretty much every single piece of media that you can think of. Think back to whatever it was in your childhood, and it has been changed or adapted or fixed to represent a more modern era and a more modern audience. Sometimes that's as simple as just changing the race of the characters around to make them more inclusive or more diverse. Which, works until you realize that pretty much everybody of a single race has been wiped out to make everything more diverse. And then you realize it's not actually more diverse anymore. It's literally just a cultural erasure. Or sometimes they take characters who were heroic. They were pillars of their particular setting. They were the examples. They were the role models to the people around them. And then they get torn down. So, we're going to get into a few examples here. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know as well. Some of them I wish I knew better. And some of them maybe I will know better someday. But we'll get into those right now. And the first thing that we're going to get into is going to be something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. The Wheel of Time. If you're unfamiliar with the Wheel of Time, this is I do believe it is currently still the single longest fantasy series in the world. Yes, I do believe it still outpaces the Discworld series, which I haven't actually read, but I heard it's very good. The Wheel of Time is very simple. There is a world that is very similar to our own. However, this world has magic, and they call it the One Power. The One Power is kind of like the undercurrent energies that keep everything in the world moving. There's fire, air, water, earth, and spirit. And these things drive everything. And there are some people in this world who can tap into that power. They're called channelers. This magic is divided into half. There is a half for men, there's a half for women. And this power has been provided to us by a creator. He is the one who created the world, who created the wheel, and after his work was done, he left. He also had a counterpart, the Dark One. If he is the creator, the Dark One will be the destroyer. And he decided that the destroyer, who was absolutely necessary, also needed to be reined in, and so he was imprisoned. And through various events that happen in the series, the Dark One is learning how to touch the world more and more. And I'm not going to get into anything more than that because that would be getting into spoiler territories. The point being, though, that you had this established world, and it is very similar to ours, and so it follows many of the same rules. That is to say that this being a fantasy medieval setting, life is hard. This is a time where we are still agricultural. We do not have technology yet. Like, the idea of fireworks is still a fantastic thing. And it is a closely guarded secret by the people who actually use them. That is like the highest technology that we have, except for that runs on the One Power. And so, being this harsh medieval setting, men are men, women are women. Everybody has a certain task that they are supposed to be doing because we all have to play our part, otherwise none of us are going to get out of this alive. So we have men who tend to be leaders, warriors, fighters, builders, and we have women who tend to be organizers, who tend to be medics, who tend to be message carriers, secret keepers. Men do much of the physical work, women do much of the mental work. Which is how it always was. Back in medieval times, yes, everybody was working. However, men were the ones who would leave the home to go do all the physical work, whereas women would stay home and take care of the domestic work. This is what everyone was best suited for. However, the books took this and they created very interesting dynamics out of it. Sometimes they would play it straight. Sometimes they would reverse it. Sometimes these two things would come into conflict, and sometimes they would have to be cooperative in order to achieve a certain goal. This is absolutely reflective of real life. And in doing so, you had characters in the book who would become pinnacles of these certain traits. A good example from the book would be Moraine Moraine's warder, Lan. Now, just a quick explanation of that. Moraine is an Aes Sedai. She is a channeler. She's a very good channeler. However, she is still a woman. Okay? She is not physically strong. She is not physically tough. And any channeler can be killed by anything as slight as a nick on the arm. Just because they have magic does not mean that they can't die from an infection. So, Aes Sedai have what are called warders. These are elite warriors and bodyguards. They exist for one singular purpose, and that is to keep their Aes Sedai safe. And that is in a variety of ways, not just physically. They keep them physically safe, emotionally centered, mentally safe. They protect. And he is the perfect example of what a warder should be. He is strong. He is stoic. He's driven. He is strong-willed. And he does everything that he can to the best of his abilities to keep her safe. Moraine, for her part, is also a strong-willed person, but she's very intellectual, she's very perceptive, she's very analytical. Whereas he handles all the physical tasks, she handles pretty much everything else. She plans, she organizes, she strategizes. She is absolutely fantastic at what she does. And the two of them together are an unstoppable force. And they're really a treat every time they're in the books. The Amazon series, however, has absolutely destroyed that. See, originally, the main character of the book, well, I say main character. There is a main character, but he also kind of shares that spot. The main character is Rand al'Thor. And he is the main character because he is a very, very important person. And that's all I can really say because anything more than that is a spoiler. He does share that spot, though, however, with two other boys, those being Mat and Perrin, because all three of them are very important. And that's really all I can say. I'm trying so hard not to spoil things. However, the story follows Rand because everything does kind of center around him. And I mean so not just because he's the main character of the book, but everything centering around him is actually a plot point of the book. It's not your imagination. It's not just because the narrator keeps following him. Everything keeps following him. He is the main character, and everything in the book, in all of the books, falls down on him. Now, if you were to look at this, who do you think is Rand al'Thor? Well, it's not her. Because Rand al'Thor is not a girl. No, that's Moraine. And while Moraine is incredibly important, she's actually not the main character. In fact, she does everything she can to support the main character because she knows that while everything is falling on him, if he dies, everyone is doomed. No. She's important, but she's not the main character. So it must be him, right? Actually, no. That's Lan. That's her warder. He's very important to her. And he's also very important to the main character, but he's not the main character. So is it her? Well, no, again, because the Rand is not a girl. So it's not her. So is it her? No, it's not her either, because Rand is not a girl. Oh, there he is. The main character of the entire book has been relegated to the back. And as a matter of fact, as I mentioned before, while everything is coming down on him, it's not just him. The other two boys, Mat and Perrin, are in a similar, just slightly lesser position because everything keeps falling down on them too. They are literally fated to suffer. because all the events are literally dragged behind them. Oh, there's Matt, and there's Perrin. So they've taken these characters who were supposed to be the main characters of the show, and they have relegated them to the literal background. Now that's bad enough from a storytelling perspective, and I can go on and on about how Amazon has screwed up the Wheel of Time. I don't need to, because there are people who have done it so much better than I have, and I do recommend that you go watch them. On YouTube, you can look up the White Cloaks, who have done considerable breakdowns of literally everything wrong in this, or I recommend Night's Watch, who have also done absolutely amazing breakdowns, both from the fan perspective and the literary perspective, given that Shad is a published fantasy author himself. The point here is, though, that all of these characters were meant to embody something. For Rand, the things that he embodied were mostly perseverance. Because given the position that Rand is in, he has every single reason to quit. I mean, the amount of suffering that his character goes through in the books is really just kind of unfathomable. I mean, it would take a lot for you to use words on a page to really make you feel for somebody. And I know that's, that's like one of the hallmarks of being a good author, is like if you can make the audience feel something through words alone. You feel bad for Rand with everything that he goes through in the books. Perseverance is probably his greatest trait. Because no matter what happens, he always keeps going. He might not always do it the right way. In fact, a lot of times he does it the wrong way. But he keeps going. For Matt, his thing is duty. I mean, he starts off the book being an absolute lazy shirker. Well, okay, not lazy, but he does shirk his duties whenever he can. He's not the get up and go get 'em kind of character. Not at first. He does grow into it. As for Perrin, Perrin is the gentle giant. He was born bigger than everybody else. He was born stronger than everybody else. And his entire character arc is him learning moderation and control. Because control is not simply stopping something all the time, but control is also releasing and directing it. All three of these characters have admirable qualities to them, and those are hardly the only qualities they have. I mean, they have other qualities to them as well, but they're secondary. Every single one of them is a very interesting character study on their own, and they are to be admired. But then we get to the Amazon adaptation. And in the Amazon adaptation, which has a total of 2 seasons to it, both are terrible, Rand, the one character who is defined by his perseverance, quits. Like, just period. He's done. He quits. His entire shtick now is he basically just wants to go home. He spends the entire series wanting to go home. He doesn't want to do any of this stuff. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He has no curiosity about the outside world. He has no ambitions about seeing other places. He just wants to go home. And that's it. For the character of Matt, he actually has a very similar thing, which is a little bit more in line of his character. However, he's supposed to be learning not to do that. He's supposed to be learning how to not just be a crybaby who wants to go home. He's supposed to be learning things like duty and honor and respect. And he's not. Instead, all he does is whine about wanting to go home, or shirking his duties and just watching everybody else go off to have adventures. As for Perrin's entire thing is learning control. The problem is, in the series, he has nothing to control. He's not given any strength. He's not even necessarily that big. He's just kind of there. He's essentially been stripped of all the qualities he was supposed to have, and without having those qualities in the first place, well, then there's nothing to control. It is the old adage of being a warrior in a garden versus a gardener in a war. Well, book Perrin was a warrior in a garden. TV show Perrin is a gardener in a war. And the last character that I can bring back would be Lan. Now, Moraine hasn't changed too much. I will give them that. She is still kind of a take-charge, intellectual kind of character. She's perceptive. She knows what's going on, even though she's been turned into an idiot in the series. But I'm not going to dwell on that for too long. Lan, however, is supposed to be representative of basically just everything masculine. He is supposed to be strong, stoic, fit. All of these things. And it has already all been stripped away from him. He is now rather weak-willed and meager. He does what he does when he's told to do it, and only when he's told to do it. He has thoughts and ideas, all of which are completely snuffed out by everyone in the series, and he will not stand up for himself. He has essentially zero self-esteem, zero self-confidence, and honestly, if he were to disappear, I don't know that anybody would notice. His character has been completely destroyed and left just an empty husk. It hasn't even been replaced with anything. These were all heroic characters that were absolutely just annihilated. Now, as for the female characters, I could get into them, but I don't want to. They're not too changed. Mostly they have just been given the main character treatment for the show. They are more take charge, they're more stand forward, and they get all the heroic moments, whether they make sense or not. Whether sometimes this involves simply breaking the rules of the setting, which I'm not going to get into either because that could be an entire lecture on its own. But either way, they get to take over all of the moments that were handled by the rest of the main characters, and they get to adopt all of their traits as well, whether they fit or not. And that's fine. I have nothing wrong with the female characters having traits like perseverance, like duty and honor and these things. That's fine, and if you wanted to give them those, you're more than welcome to. But you don't take them away from the other characters to do so. Because that is simply stripping all of the heroic properties from those characters and removing anything that would make them role models to begin with. The second one I want to talk about is one that I actually have not watched, but I just want to touch on it briefly, and that will be the Halo series. So, if you're unfamiliar with Halo, Halo was a video game series that was put out by Bungie, then Microsoft, a long time ago. And the first Halo is the only one that I actually played. I will someday get around to playing at least the other two after this, but I don't know when that's going to be. But the story is very simple. Humanity has spread into the stars and we met aliens. And guess what? We and the aliens didn't get along. Go figure. Has there ever been a story where humans and the aliens did get along? And don't say Star Trek because we fought half of the aliens there too. So, when we went to war with the aliens, the first thing that we did is we used all of our missiles, tanks, planes, jets, rockets, everything. And we threw it at the aliens. We even nuked them a few times, and it turns out it's not working. So, this doctor, that doctor, decided that what we needed was a new class of soldier. A better soldier. a super soldier, a space marine, or at least, close enough to it. And so they developed a super soldier program, and after a few failures, they finally made it work, and thus you get to play as this guy. His name is John. I think he's got a last name, but I have no idea what it is. His name is John, however, people only really address him by his rank. He is the Master Chief. No, that is not a name, that is an actual rank. He's a Master Chief. I don't know if they necessarily always go around calling people by their rank. Do people on ships just go around saying, "Hi, Captain"? "Oh, hello, Admiral." "Hello, Third Petty Officer." I mean, actually, know what? Now that I say it, they probably do. That actually makes sense. Regardless, so, here we have Halo, and you play as John, the Master Chief, as he crash lands onto this enemy world, and he's got to survive and uncover mysteries and kill aliens and stuff like that. Okay, it's a pretty straightforward game. Granted, once you get into the later games, that lore iceberg goes real deep. But for the first game, doesn't matter. I mean, all you're doing is just running around, they tell you where to go, you go there, kill everything between you and there, and just enjoy the ride. Now, as such, you do get some dialogue between him and his own personal AI, Cortana. And both of them have a snarky personality. Because Cortana, being the super hyper-intelligent AI, knows a lot more than he does about basically everything. However, what she lacks is human intuition and experience. And so she has the answer for everything. Which is great, because answers are something that you need. Master Chief happens to have the combat experience and intuition needed to handle the actual events as they come through. And so you get a lot of conversation between them. She, of course, is the intellectual, perceptive type, where she's observing everything going on, taking all of this in and making decisions. And he, given the fact that he has arms and legs, he does everything else. Everything that you need thumbs for. But it's also his job to determine how things get done. And so he has a personality. He is very stoic. He's very driven. He's very direct. And he does the job. And she supports him along the way. As such, he is your typical perfect soldier. I mean, he was literally created to be the perfect soldier. Oh, and Tux says Master Chief is the highest enlisted rank in the Navy. They are called Master Chief and nothing else ever. Okay, I didn't know that. I learned a thing today. Wait, you say highest enlisted rank. Does that mean there's actually ranks higher? I don't know. Now I'm kind of curious. At any rate, doesn't matter. So he embodies the perfect soldier. He's strong, he's fast, he's tough. Okay? He makes decisions and he acts on them. Okay? He's decisive. And one of the most important things is in the show, he never takes his helmet off, because it doesn't matter who he is underneath. All that matters is what he does. Because this is how men are in general defined. Men are not defined by who they are, but by what they do. Which is why, when we ask the question of who are your role models, the reason we're asked that is because these people have traits that we want to embody. If you made your hero Master Chief, this Master Chief, because apparently if I say just Master Chief, I could be referring to a whole bunch of people. This guy, if he was your hero, what are the things that you would want to emulate? Are you going to be a biogenetically enhanced super soldier? Well, of course not. However, can you be strong like him? Yeah. Can you be tough like him? Yeah. Can you learn to be decisive like him? Absolutely. Can you absolutely ask yourself in any situation, what would the Master Chief do right now? Sure you could. That is the point of having role models. However, what did they do in the TV show? Well, the first thing that happened is, at least they kept him as the main character. I mean, he's at least front and he's on the front of the poster. Actually, they didn't keep him as the main character. She's the main character. She's the one that takes over. It was another one of those bait and switch shows where they're going to put him front and center, and then they're going to relegate him to the background afterwards. It's another trend that we've seen in modern cinema, and I'm not going to get into it right now. But in the show, he is shown to be still, physically as strong as he was before, but he's shown to be more sensitive, he's shown to be more indecisive, more contemplative, and they took his helmet off, because why not? The important part was for him to embody these ideals without you having to know who he was underneath. You didn't have to know who he was to identify with him. But they had to take the helmet off because they wanted you to be able to see his face, as if this is going to add something to the character. It does not. Nobody cares what he was under the suit. They cared that he was this ideal in physical form. In that way, he was similar to a Greek god. Didn't matter what he looked like. All that mattered is what he did. But they couldn't have that. He was a perfect ideal, and they had to bring that down to a more human level. And we have seen that in many different places. So I'm just going to brush through these next couple really quick because there's way too much to go over. The first, of course, is going to be Star Wars. Now, mind you, I am a huge Star Wars fan. Okay? Have been a Star Wars fan ever since I was a tiny little child. When I first saw, X-Wings shooting down the canal, trying to destroy the Death Star. I've been fan that long. And so, as everybody knows, eventually George Lucas decided he was kind of done and he was ready to pass the torch, and so he sold LucasArts and everything that went with it to Disney, which the universe has regarded as a bad decision because it has given us this. Now, Disney's history with Star Wars has been rather hit or miss, with significantly more misses than hits. There were a few things that were fine. For example, when Disney got a hold of Star Wars Rebels was already in its third season, I think. Second, third, fourth season, something. It was already in progress. And so they did manage to keep that going, and Star Wars Rebels came out pretty good. There were some changes that happened along the way, but by and large it was pretty good. Similarly, The Bad Batch kind of picked up where it left off. There was a little bit of crossover between it, also the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars and Rebels kind of ran side by side, and The Bad Batch kind of bridges the gap between them a little bit. So The Bad Batch came out and it was okay. I've heard good things about The Mandalorian, but I haven't actually watched it, so I can only go on what I've heard. And I've heard some bad things about it, but I've heard a lot more good things than bad things. That being said, in the middle of The Mandalorian, we got the Book of Boba Fett, which has been not universally, but majority just regarded as bad, because it decided that it needed to tell a different story. Not about Boba Fett, the orphaned Mandalorian bounty hunter who's going out and doing bounty hunter stuff. No, they had to use the Book of Boba Fett to tell a story about racism and inclusivity. Yeah, that went over like a lead balloon. Very much similar to how their movies went when they went into... Well, the first thing they did is they went into The Force Awakens, which most people regarded as being okay. My opinion when I saw the Force Awakens in theaters, I said it was good. I liked it better when it was called A New Hope, but this was good. Then you had The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, both of which were regarded as absolutely awful because, well, they just were. You had The Last Jedi, which was character assassination, and you had The Rise of Skywalker, which just took the entire canon of Star Wars and threw it in the trash. But on that point of character assassination, that's where I really wanted to focus today. And there are essentially 3 cases that I want to talk about. Number 1, I want to talk about Han Solo. If you know Star Wars, you probably know Han Solo. He is the gruff and sarcastic, gambling smuggler that we met in the very first movie. Now, he has a certain set of qualities about him. He's kinda laid back, he doesn't take anything too seriously, he's in it for himself, he's in it for the money. This is a person who doesn't apparently have a whole lot of morals, a whole lot of principles, a whole lot of convictions. He just kinda goes about and does. At least that's your first impression of him. Turns out, he is actually a really decent person. He has no love for the Empire, he does feel for the plight of everybody crushed under the Empire, and he is willing to help out wherever he can, sometimes even at his own detriment. He is your typical kind of, not reluctant hero, but kind of like an anti-hero. He's going to be there in the end, he's on the right side, he just doesn't want to do it the same way everybody else does. To the point where he begins the first movie as a smuggler taking a job, and he ends in Return of the Jedi as an actual general in the Rebellion fleet, leading his own ground missions. He goes through an extensive character development. And then we don't see him anymore. We never see Han Solo until Disney begins their sequel trilogy. And what do we see in the sequel trilogy? The heroic general of the Rebel Alliance has been reduced again to that of a petty smuggler, a liar, and a cheat, because the very first time that we meet him, there are 2 cartels, both of which want him dead, for apparently stealing from both of them. Which begs the question of, well, why and how? He was a general in the Alliance. Why did he go back to being a smuggler? Why is he suddenly bad at it? And how did we get here? And before we even meet him, we meet him because the main character of the sequel trilogy, Rey, has found his old ship, the Millennium Falcon, managed to take it off of the planet, fixed it, despite the fact that she's never been on a ship before, and he's confused by all of this, even though it was his ship. How did he even lose it in the first place? And of course, this goes on, with him being constantly surprised by new things at every turn, because suddenly everybody is more competent than him, everybody is smarter than him, everybody is tougher than him, for reasons that nobody can seem to grasp until we get into the end scene with him. And yeah, spoiler alert for a movie that you really probably shouldn't watch, he gets killed. He literally walks up to the bad guy and lets the bad guy kill him. Now, I have thoughts on exactly what was going on in that scene, and I'm not going to get into them now. I do have a couple of explanations that might excuse it. But the fact that I would have to excuse it is... It's an accusation unto itself. Okay? I shouldn't have to excuse it. It was bad writing. Similarly, in the next movie we have the character of Luke Skywalker. Now, Luke Skywalker begins his journey in the first movie on the planet Tatooine. He is literally just a teenager. Okay? Not exactly sure how old he is. I don't think that it really matters. But he's a teenager. Young adult. Something like that. And he hates it. He lives on a farm. And not just any farm. A moisture farm. Because it's a desert planet. which means that his entire life revolves around go out in the morning, collect the buckets, and then put the buckets back out, and, when it gets cold overnight, collect the water again. That's what he does. Eventually, however, fate catches up with him, and he ends up being thrown onto this journey where he's going to have to save the galaxy. Yeah, I know. That's just how it happens sometimes. But he goes from being this kid who doesn't really want to get involved. Well, I mean, he does want to get involved. He wants to be on the Empire side. To being this reluctant hero who's got to go out and help save the day. Or at least help the hero save the day, I should say. Because, does he save the day? Yeah, he does. Obi-Wan Kenobi saves the day first, though. So he helps Obi-Wan save the day, and then he has to do it after him. In the next movie, though, he begins to come to grips with exactly who and what he is. He is now firmly in the fight. He can't run away from it now. And so he's stepping up. He's becoming a leader. He's becoming a hero. He is showing qualities like courage, like determination. And as time goes on in the movie, he eventually gets proper training from an actual master, begins to master his own body and his own abilities, which is also admirable. We should all be a master of our own body. And eventually, throughout that movie and the next movie, he has his fall, he has his low point, but he picks himself back up, that determination that we were talking about, and he saves the galaxy permanently. Okay, not permanently, it's called Star Wars for a reason. There's always a new war. But he does save the galaxy. He puts an end to the Empire. And then what do we find in the sequels? Well, to make it very short, after he saved the galaxy, he tried to start a Jedi Temple. That failed, because he tried to murder one of his own students because he felt like his student was being influenced by the dark side. And so he figured, well, it's a late-term abortion time. I'm just going to take my lightsaber and cut him out. Oh, and by the way, did I mention the student he's trying to cut out is his own nephew? Yeah. So we went from being this hero to this psychopath who is just going to murder anyone and anything regardless of his relationship to it. After that, his temple gets burned down because not only does he try to kill his own nephew, but his nephew is now somehow better than him, somehow stronger than him. His nephew, we don't see the fight, but obviously Luke loses because his nephew wins, escapes, and burns down the entire temple on the way out. How? I don't know. So when we catch up to Luke Skywalker, he's living in exile on this distant planet. He took his X-Wing and threw it in the ocean because don't need that anymore. And that's it. He's just given up on life. He's given up on life. He's given up on the galaxy. He's given up on the Jedi. He's given up on everything. He no longer cares what happens to him. He no longer cares what happens to anybody else. And when we do finally track him down, and we say that, hey, Rey says we need you back, his response is, piss off. I don't care. Yeah, but you know what? Your friends are in trouble. I don't care about my friends. One of your friends is dead. I don't care about my dead friends. And you can see already how his character has been utterly destroyed. And it doesn't really get any better. Because even though we try to bring him back, and we try to pretend like he's some kind of fallen hero, the excuses made for him being a fallen hero don't add up. And the path that he takes to come back also doesn't add up. By the time the main character, Rey, comes back to save the day, he has essentially taught her nothing. She has taken nothing from him. In fact, by the time she leaves the planet, she already realizes that she is a stronger Force user than he is, she's better with a lightsaber than he is, and in fact, he never really had anything to teach her at all. In fact, she was there, the Force had guided her there to teach him something. This is the man who is supposed to start a brand new Jedi temple. He is supposed to be the personification of everything a Jedi should strive to be like. It has all been stripped away from him. His character has been completely obliterated. And then, at the end of the movie, he dies. Noticing a trend here. But while we're on the subject of the Jedi, why don't we just talk about the Jedi as a whole? So in Star Wars, it was your classic good guys versus bad guys thing. Literally light versus dark. You have the light side of the Force, the dark side of the Force. There are those who follow the light side of the Force, they call themselves Jedi, and those who follow the dark side of the Force, they call themselves Sith. They have a similar goal, but different ways of achieving it. The goal, of course, is that they want to kind of be a dominating power in the galaxy. The ways that they go about achieving it, however, differ. For the Jedi, they believe in simply numbers, really. They believe that they can convert people to being just like them, teach anybody who is Force sensitive how to use the Force, and by becoming a Jedi and upholding these values of peace, cooperation, organization, and such, that we can create a better galaxy together. And once we've created a better galaxy, everything will be good. For the Sith, they believe that the Force is just power. Everything revolves around power. There is no truth but power, which if you pay attention enough is a common thing that you'll hear among communists. There is no truth but power. They believe that the Force is a tool and a weapon to be used against people who can't fight back. You use it to subjugate them. And their entire philosophy revolves around getting stronger. Specifically, the rule of two. The idea that there are only ever two Sith at a time. You have one to be the master, and he embodies power. You have one who is the apprentice, and he craves power. And when the apprentice is suitably strong enough that the apprentice should kill the master, then take on another apprentice to raise them up even stronger than they are, and the cycle should continue. And this was Star Wars for decades. And it was a very simple story. It was good guys versus bad guys. And you can go ahead and argue about which, philosophies might be better, which might be worse, maybe things have been mislabeled, and these conversations have been had to death. But there has been a change in that recently. In particular, when we're going through shows like, let's say, The Acolyte, which just came out. And if you've heard anything about The Acolyte, it's probably been bad. And if it hasn't been bad, it's probably been defending the Acolyte against all of those bad people. So, why are we talking about the Acolyte then? Well, because the idea of the Acolyte is simple, and I'm going to spoil the hell out of it because it is not worth your time. The idea of the Acolyte is simple. On this planet, somewhere far, far away, there is a civilization of only women. Why only women? Well, because the showrunner actually is a complete misandrist and actually hates men. But that's neither here nor there. It is a planet of women. And when I say planet of women, I really just mean like one city. It's not like an entire planet. It's one little hidden coven. So you have this little civilization there, and they use the Force. They call it the Thread. Doesn't matter. I actually do like the fact that they call it the Thread. One of the things that I've heard people complain about is they call it the Thread and not the Force, and I thought, you know what? On this planet alone, we have hundreds of languages, and if you had to translate the word magic into every single language, you would have hundreds of different words for the same thing. Other cultures are allowed to call it different things. Whether you think it's stupid or not, that's on you. But the idea here is simple. They are trying to use the Force to create life, specifically by using the Force to impregnate somebody. Don't ask. If it doesn't make sense, and it's not going to make sense. However, the Jedi are of course searching the galaxy for new material. They need new people to bring into the Order. They scour the galaxy looking for children who are Force sensitive because, well, let's face it, if your child is Force sensitive, who's going to teach your child how to use the Force? You? You don't know how to use the Force, but the Jedi do. And so the Jedi make a point of finding Force-sensitive children so that they can take them under their wing, raise them up to be Jedi, teach them how to use the Force, and that just adds to more Jedi. So the entire thing revolves around these women on this planet and the Jedi showing up. Now, the Jedi didn't exactly know why they were there at first. They just knew that there was something going on because the Force does tend to give premonitions. Eventually, the Jedi, they stumble upon this group of women. They find out that they have children that were created through the use of the Force, and they are very, very strong in the Force. And so the Jedi decide that, well, I mean, they are a little old, but we need to take them back. And of course, we then begin the discussion of, should the Jedi take them back? Can the Jedi take them back? Who actually gets to decide here? Should it be the adults' decision? Should it be the children's decision? Should it be the Jedi's decision? We don't know for certain. At the end of the day, however, we've decided that we're not going to have that discussion at all. Because what the Acolyte does is simply have the Jedi massacre every single person in the settlement. And then, once everybody is dead, then we can take the children, because there's nobody left to say no. And it's that simple. If there's nobody left standing, then you win. Which again, if you look at, like communist groups, that tends to be how it works. If you don't have an opponent, you can't lose. So if you can remove your opponent either through destroying their reputation, through putting them in prison, or just outright killing your opponent, if you don't have an opponent, you can't lose. And if it seems like I'm laying that on rather thick, there might be a reason for it. Read between the lines. So that's where the Jedi stand right now. We have taken this group who did have principles that they stood by. They believed in order. They believed in peace. They believed in negotiation, all of these things. They believed in a non-violent course of action. And we've turned them into monsters. We've turned them into psychopathic murderers. Now, we saw a little bit of this in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. There were Jedi like General Krell, who was shown to be not quite a Sith, but he was at least leaning in that direction. However, that was a commentary on essentially the stresses of war. When General Krell turned against his own troopers, it's because he looked at the war they were in, the war that they had been in for years now, and said, we're not winning this war. And I'm going to jump ship, because when this war ends, and this war is going to come to an end, I want to be on the winning side. However, that wasn't the Jedi as a whole. That was a single character betraying the Jedi. That was all about him. And so at that point, he ceases to be a hero character. He is absolutely a villain. But the Jedi remain until now. With the Acolyte, we've decided that we're going to take the entire order, all the good guys, the general idea of being one of the good guys, and we're going to make that bad. We're going to turn this into a bad thing. So moving on, I'm going to cover this really briefly too, because I don't have as much to say about it. But Marvel. Now, I don't think I need to really go into the whole Marvel thing that happened, because I think at this point, if you're not aware of Marvel, then you literally are not involved in culture, like in general. But it started with the Hulk way back when. I don't even know what year it was. And then we had Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, the Avengers, and it just kind of went on from there. It was really good. It remains one of the greatest movie series ever done. Certainly one of the most expansive. I mean, sure, there are a lot of like James Bond films. However, all of the James Bond films are standalone films. What they did with Marvel phases like 1 through 3, I think it was? Yeah, I think it was Marvel phases 1 through 3. Was create not just an entire cinematic universe, but an entire cohesive story that you could literally watch from beginning to end, starting with Captain America, the first Avenger, and going up through Avengers Endgame. It was an incredible feat, and it gave us incredible heroes. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye. It gave us a lot of really great heroes, people who were admirable, people who were role models, they were heroic, they were everything great, everything that we wanted to see on screen. People that you absolutely could emulate and imitate, and be a better person for it. However, like all good things, it had to come to an end, and Endgame was almost the perfect way to finish it out. There were some things that maybe could have been a bit better, but if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't change a thing. Endgame was pretty damn good. After that, though, we began Phase 4, and after Endgame, the original showrunners just kind of said, it's been a hell of a ride. It's time to hang it up, time to take a break, and time to enjoy the laurels that we have reaped, okay? And so other people took over, and these other people, well, they did have big shoes to fill. They also had big aspirations. After all, the guys that made Marvel Phases 1 through 3, they will go down in history. I don't know what their names are because I'm really bad with names, but other people will know them. And so that kind of recognition, that kind of reputation, it's going to draw people in who do want to be like that. However, everybody is so desperate to make their own mark that they had to start changing things. This is where we got things like WandaVision. Which you can see it, it's down there. See, look at that, WandaVision. It's right down there. It's pretty well hidden. Just like Loki, just like the What If, and just like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Notice how there's a lot of all these really good movies up here, and these are kind of hidden. There's a reason for that. Because when these new people took over, they decided that, number one, everything that was done in Marvel Phases 1 through 3, they could do better. You know, anything you can do, I can do better. Because I can do anything better than you. They could not. So, there's only a couple of things that you can do then. Number one is you can try to improve yourself. You can do this by trying to refine your writing, refine your directing, help your actors do better while they're on screen, so on and so forth. Alternately, and far more easy, is you can destroy what came before you and make yourself look better by comparison. As such, we had to suddenly find all the flaws in what came before. And when I say all the flaws, I'm not talking about like actual legitimate flaws. I'm not talking about things that could have been done better with cinematography or direction. I'm not talking about things that could have been done better in writing or set design. No. We had to look for microaggressions. We had to look for things like sexism or racism or things of that nature. We had to find characters who were speaking out of turn. For example, why did we have to have a white man who was the main character of a movie when we could have had somebody who was not white, or somebody who was not a man, or preferably both? Why do we have all of these white characters in here when we should have more diversity? Why do we have all of these men in here when we should have more diversity? Why do we not have enough diversity in all of these other movies? And so we had to go through and we had to fix these things. It wasn't about necessarily that you had Iron Man, who was this broken character to begin with. He was, a partier, a philanderer, he was all of these other things. It wasn't enough that we had this broken character who learned to be heroic, who learned to be sacrificial, who learned to be this icon. No, we have to focus instead on his race and his gender, because both of those are problematic. If we can't attack the character, then we can at least attack the body. And so we began to go through each and every one of these. And we said, well, this character is problematic, it must be replaced. It doesn't matter what they stood for. The character is problematic. So we had to get rid of Iron Man. We had to get rid of Captain America. We had to get rid of Thor. All of these characters were problems. And by extension, everything that they stood for is also a problem. And it has to be replaced. Which is what they did. They went through and they replaced all the heroes. And they said, no more of these. The question is why? Well, as I pointed out, there is a part of this that is just people who want to be better. People who say that I want all of the adulation and respect, but are completely not deserving of that respect and adulation. Okay? Everybody wants to be an astronaut. Not everyone is going to be an astronaut. Only a few people ever will be. You can get close, and maybe you end up working at NASA. But not everyone gets to be an astronaut. Okay? Maybe you want to be a race car driver, and maybe you are. But maybe it's not going to be NASCAR. Okay? Maybe it might just be the smaller circuits. Not everybody is going to be capable of reaching the top. It's about being the best you can, though. And if you can't reach the top, it's not about dragging the top down so that you can stand on top of what's left. However, that's where we are nowadays. And so I want to take this back to real life. I've been talking a lot about media. We talked about The Wheel of Time on Amazon. We talked about Halo on HBO. We talked about Star Wars and Marvel and Disney. But this is all fiction. So what does all of this mean? What's the point of it? Back in 2020, during the Summer of Love, which is a time period that I keep going back to for a reason, we had a very extensive period of unrest. During this time, we were literally burning down cities, we were assaulting people, we were killing people, and one of the things that we did is we tore down statues. And a lot of people were asking, why are we tearing down the statues? Of course, there were, lots of explanations for it, and those explanations were bad. For example, every single person who was torn down was accused of being a slave owner, whether they were or not. And if they weren't accused of being a slave owner, they were accused of being a capitalist. Or if it wasn't a capitalist, it was some kind of anti-communist, figure, or a fascist. There was an accusation levied at every single person that we have ever made a statue out of or ever will make a statue out of. Every single one of them. And this was always justification for tearing it down. A great example, and it's in here somewhere. I don't know. Oh, it's right there in the middle. Thomas Jefferson. The Thomas Jefferson statue pulled down. And why? Well, Thomas Jefferson's statue was pulled down because Thomas Jefferson is a racist and a slave owner. However, Thomas Jefferson is also one of the founding fathers of the country, without whom, well, this country probably wouldn't exist. And if the country did exist, it would probably still have slaves. After all, slavery has not gone away in the world. There are more slaves today, just because of increasing human population, than there were back then. Most of it's in the Middle East, some of it's over in Asia. But slavery absolutely exists today. It doesn't exist in the first world, however, because of people like him. Did he own slaves? Yes. Did he also write into the Constitution of the United States that slavery should be removed and lay the groundwork for it to be removed later on? He did. He, along with all the other founding fathers of the U.S. That wasn't really important, though. The same thing is true of Christopher Columbus. They tore down his statues as well. Why? Well, it's not because Christopher Columbus had slaves. He didn't. He was captain of a merchant ship, and he went to find new routes to India. Christopher Columbus's greatest crime was getting lost. He bumped into land and thought he'd landed in India, hence the name Indians. But they were just the North American Aboriginals. So, why did we have to tear down his statues? Well, we tore down his statues because he's regarded as a colonizer, he's regarded as a racist, and, you know, pretty much all the normal things that you could levy at anybody, really. Just every ist, every phobe that you want to find in the dictionary, you can label him with that. And so all of his statues had to be torn down too. They've torn down George Washington, they've torn down Thomas Adams, they've torn down Abraham Lincoln, they've torn down Union generals, they've torn down Confederate generals, they've torn down abolitionists, black and white. They have torn down all of them, to the point where it really makes you question, what exactly are they tearing down? Because it's not about tearing down racists, because they didn't stop there. It's not about tearing down slave owners, because they didn't stop there either. What is it that they're trying to get rid of? And the answer to that is, they're getting rid of heroes. They're getting rid of role models. The idea is simple. When you were in school and somebody would ask you, who is your role model? Who is your hero? You had choices. I mean, your hero could be anyone you wanted it to be. Anybody who you could identify with, anybody who had principles and ideas that you wanted to embody, things that you wanted to adopt for yourself. What they're trying to do is take away your options. It's not about slavery or racism or anything like that. The one thing that all of these people had in common is that they were all figures worthy of respect. They were all pioneers of freedom. Yes, when you look at, groups like the Confederates, whether it was a Union general or a Confederate general, both of them were fighting for freedom. For the Union generals, they were fighting for abolition, for the reunification of the country, and for the freedom of all American people within it. They thought that what the Confederacy had done was bad, that the Confederacy was oppressing its own citizenry by punishing them by seceding from the country. This is bad for everybody. From the Confederate point of view, the Union had become oppressive and wasn't allowing them to simply live their lives. The Union was trying to tell them how to run their own states. And so they seceded, and when their secession wasn't respected, they went to war. To simply say, "Leave us alone." Both sides were fighting for the same ideal, just from a different perspective. And that ideal is a threat nowadays. This idea of personal freedom, that you should be able to run your own life, is antithetical to what many people, including some people in power, believe. That you should not have this freedom to live your own life, because if you're allowed to live your own life, your life may offend or oppress somebody in some way, whether you intend it to be or not. And so the only way to fix this problem is that you cannot live your own life. Okay? You need to be told what to do and where to go. However, you can't simply take that away from people. If you were to try and simply take that freedom away from people, people will revolt. And for example, I will give you the COVID lockdowns. Many places across the country and across the world attempted to lock down their populations. They tried to put people under house arrest, to institute curfews, to tell people when you're allowed to go to the store, how long you're allowed to go to the store, what store you're allowed to go to, and what you're allowed to buy when you get there. This is not a hyperbole, this literally happened in many places across the country. And the response from many people was varied, from simple derision to outright revolt, to the point where people actually got together and pressured their governments to simply abandon the entire thing, which is why you had some states like New York, which went into complete and total lockdowns, and some states like Florida, which had basically no lockdowns at all. These people, if you were trying to remake society and remake the world, are a problem. This built-in desire for freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of association, all of these things, these are problems if your ultimate goal is to simply remake society in a different image. So how exactly do you deal with this? Well, you cannot do anything with the older population unless you intend to exterminate them. And that's not going to go over well. You try that and you're talking instant revolt. You don't want an instant revolt, because if you get an instant revolt, well, you're going to be in a fight, and if you're in a fight, there's always the chance that you might lose. Never start a fight that you don't know you're going to win. So how else do we do this? Well, it's actually very simple. Time. Time is a finite resource and is limited for everybody. We all have a limited amount of time here. Eventually, our time is going to be up. We're going to die. And when we die, everything that we believed in and everything that we valued dies with us. So it's very simple. It's a multi-generation plan. And it starts with this. The first thing that you do is knowing full well that you're going to ask these children now, who's your role model? Who are your heroes in life? If it's any of these people, you simply have to remove them and make it so that the children never know who these people were or what they stood for. Remove their statues, remove them from the books, remove their paintings, erase their entire existence. I've talked before about how Disney is actually in the process of this. Why does Disney keep doing remakes of all their old films? Well, it's actually very simple. They remake the films in the way that best suits the modern audience, and then just quietly remove the older films from the libraries. How many people have physical media anymore? If all you have is a streaming service, then once they do something like The New Little Mermaid, just remove the old Little Mermaid. And once you do that, the generations growing up will never know the old, they'll only know the new. In fact, it won't even be the new, it will just be the only. And you can change the culture. This was actually alluded to in the book 1984, when Winston said, "He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future." By changing the history, by selecting what people are allowed to learn and not allowed to learn, you can adjust the course of the future. And that's what we're seeing happening right now. The reason why all of our heroes are either being killed off or corrupted is because these heroes are dangerous to a future that we want, but others do not. If you wanted to have a future of people who are easily controlled, who will live like drones, who will do what they're told, when they're told to do it, and only what they're told, then they cannot know that there's an alternate solution. They can't know that freedom is an option or that it ever was an option. They can't know that there are better lifestyles out there. I mean, this would be no different than raising a child in a box. And so the child only knows what you feed it. If you give the child only rice every single day for every meal, then the child will have no idea that other food exists. If you only give the child water, the child will have no idea that anything else to drink exists. If the child never talks to or hears another person, the child may assume that they and you are the only people that exist in the planet. And we have case studies for this, because we have seen neglect cases like this, where the children are, once they're discovered, are completely incapable of integrating into modern society because it is completely alien to them. This is the purpose for removing all of these heroes and all of these role models. Remember the wristband. What would Jesus do? If in 100 years or 200 years they managed to burn every single Bible, to destroy and demolish every single church, to kill every Christian, if they could eliminate the idea of Christianity from the world, this idea of what would Jesus do becomes completely abstract and amorphous. It means nothing, because nobody has any idea who Jesus is anymore. Or we can literally make up who Jesus was. We can fabricate an entire new character for Jesus. We can say that Jesus was an environmentalist. Jesus actually supported abortion and women's rights. Jesus supported the redistribution of wealth and a universal basic income and universal health care. Jesus was a supporter of all of these things. He is the hero that you should want. And the children who have never had anything to push back on that, who have never seen a church, never met a Christian, never read a Bible, because they don't exist anymore, they will accept this because, well, they have nothing else. There's nothing else for them to believe. This is the end goal. You remove and destroy all of the historical role models, whether they be real or fictional. Destroy them, corrupt them, erase them, and then replace them. This is the heart of what Disney said when they said, "Let the past die. Kill it if you have to." This is not just a throwaway line in a bad movie. This is what's happening right now. The past is dying. They are killing it. Because once the past is dead, and they can rewrite it, they will rewrite the future along with it. So in summation, after this long and exhaustive diatribe, we need heroes. And we need people that we can look up to, people that can be role models. That role model can be you, but it can also be your own role models. It is going to be up to us to make sure that all of these things stay. For every single one of these statues that was torn down, all of these, we should be protecting others. It's not enough that we simply say, well, yes, I remember, because us remembering is no good. Eventually, we're going to die. Somebody else is going to inherit this world. It's not enough that we remember, because when we die, our memory dies with us. We have to preserve heroes and make new ones who actually uphold the same values. Now, one thing that is fortunate is that we do seem to be winning, slowly. When we look at things like Disney is losing money hand over fist. They are losing money so fast that their own shareholders are holding them legally accountable, because all of this garbage that they're putting out, trying to rewrite the Marvel canon, the Star Wars canon, all of it, it is costing them literal billions of dollars. They can't keep it up forever. They can keep it going for a long time. After all, Disney was built up over about 60 years. They're not going to disappear overnight, but they will eventually. And when they do, we have to be here to make sure that all of the heroic characters stay heroic characters. We have to hold on to Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. We have to hold on to Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia Organa, okay? We have to hold on to all of our heroes, and that includes some of the other ones. We have to hold on to Master Chief, okay? He's a hero, and he should stay that way, regardless of what anybody else wants to do. We protect him. We do so by not watching this garbage, and we do so by making our own stuff. Even if it's just little fan videos or fan films, and I've seen a few of them, and they're good. We keep the stuff ourselves. We keep the books and the original characters, and we let this die like it needs to. We let it die and we let it fade into obscurity. The same thing goes for Amazon's The Rings of Power, which literally nobody is watching, and the only reason that it's getting renewed for another season is because of corporate sponsorship. Amazon is losing money to keep The Rings of Power going. Why? Because in the end, the money doesn't matter. Money is a tool. It is a means to an end. Okay? They have enough money, they can literally throw it away. They can set it on fire. And so they will. Because as long as they can undo everything that Tolkien did, as long as they can change everything that Tolkien stood for, and they can raise a new generation believing that the previous heroes were actually villains, and the previous villains are now heroes, well, they'll have succeeded. And they can change an entire culture with just a few generations. That's what we're up against. And that's what we have to fight back. So, hold on to your heroes. Make sure that they are your heroes. Embody your heroes. Try to be like them. It's not just what would Jesus do. It's what would Lan do. Okay? It's what would Master Chief do. What would Luke Skywalker do? What would Thor do? And what would any of them do? Because they wouldn't be allowing this. I know that much. So I hope that gives you something to think about. Something to consider. Something that you can kind of meditate on as you go through your day. Just ask yourself, who are your heroes? What do they embody? And then what are you doing to make sure that those ideals are passed on to the next generation? How are you making them last? Not all of us are going to found a country somewhere. Not all of us are going to fight in a war or be some kind of great general. But all of us can do something, even if it's as simple as making a stupid video. We all got to make the effort. So, with that being said, I'm going to let you get on with your day, let you contemplate this. I want to thank everybody for coming out today for this little discussion. Like I said, it just kind of it dawned on me one day, and I had to get it off my chest. Because it was a 30-year-old question that I finally had an answer to, at least in part. I still don't know who my role models necessarily are, or who my heroes necessarily are, but I at least understand the concept now. And that's a start. Maybe someday I'll actually have an answer. But until that day comes, if you want to see more stuff like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell icon, that way you get notified whenever these videos come out. If you know somebody else who's also struggling with the idea of who are your heroes and role models, then maybe share this video with them. It might give them the insight they need to finally make the decision on their own. Or if they're like me, maybe just enough to get them thinking about it. But if you just like what I'm doing and you want to hear more from me, leave a like on the video. If you want to talk back, leave a comment down below. And if you don't want to leave a comment down below, you can always join the Discord server. There should be a link in the description, and if the link doesn't work, just leave a comment down below and I'll get a new link. One way or another, I'll find a way to make it work. So, thank you all for coming out. I look forward to seeing you all next time. And until then, take care.